flying softly along the northern shore of Massachusetts. Most of the lower portion of Plum Island Barrier Beach is a federal wildlife reserve called the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, except for the extreme southern tip, which is a Massachusetts state park. From late spring to midsummer, the beaches of the refuge are closed because of the endangered piping plover, which nests along the open beach just beyond reach of the highest tide. The state park at the southern tip of the barrier island is not closed, but the small breeding area for the plovers is cordoned off with a string fence. Here, about 25 to 30 pairs of plovers eke out a breeding season each year. But this small cordoned-off area is an excellent place to obtain pictures of these rare birds during the breeding season. Being a wildlife videographer, I joined in on the group of photographers lining the string fence, trying to get that one great shot of a baby piping plover. Plover chicks are very cute. With outsized legs and fuzzball bodies, they run around pecking at bugs right out of the egg. These chicks are rambunctious even at a day old, and are capable of exploring far from the nest, straining the patience of even the most attentive parent. While every other photographer was concentrating on the plovers, I noticed that they had neighbors, least terns, which share the plover's nesting area and habits. I'd seen terns, of course, but I had never seen one close up before. So taking a break from the plovers, I set up my camera and lens and focused on some terns that seemed to be nesting at the far end of the beach. When I looked through the lens, I was stunned. My first thought was, they look so evolved into their form. Their sleek body appeared to be perfectly matched to their life, a life of diving into the ocean after fish. Their aerodynamic lines, culminating in a rapier-like bill, belied their delicate feathers and lilting flight. To my mind, they were beautiful. Although I didn't know much about terns, I decided right then to turn my attention away from the plovers and dedicate my time to understanding these birds. So I spent the next 2 years documenting their lives, watching their mating rituals, how their chicks develop, and observing how they live. They've been part of the lore of coastal New England for hundreds of years. In the old days, fishermen could tell where to cast their lines by watching where the terns were feeding. They called them little strikers for the way they flung themselves headlong into the water. So this is what I found out. This is the story of the least tern, the little striker. The least tern is the smallest of the 12 species of terns that commonly nest in eastern North America. They average 9 inches in length with a 20-inch wingspan and weigh just 1.5 ounces, or about the size of a mockingbird. They are great travelers, often migrating from the beaches of coastal Massachusetts to Mexico or Central and South America. They usually arrive at the nesting site in May. Common terns and least terns share similar habitats and habits, but common terns are larger with an all-black head and red bill, while least terns have a white forehead and a yellow bill during the breeding season. When the least terns first arrive at the breeding colony, they hang around by the water's edge, alternating fishing, resting, and engaging in mating behavior. The group will suddenly fly off and wheel around the sky in a tight formation, seemingly for the joy of it, and land again and rest and preen. Some pair up during the northern migration and remain paired for the duration of the breeding season, but many pairings happen when the terns arrive at the colony. The pre-pairing is defined by various behaviors that resemble a kind of species ritual, including group flights, fish offerings, circle dances, bow gestures, practice nests, and actual matings. A male might land with a fish, flash it about a prospective female who,
if she feels moved to do so, will engage her partner in a circle dance with neck outstretched and bill pointing to the sky. He may offer her the fish and snatch it back at the last minute and then fly off. She may follow or not. If she follows, they fly around in wide circles, calling and chasing each other, often joined by other females and even males with fish. Then they land and repeat the behavior, sometimes several times. The males catch fish and chase the females, trying to get them to land and accept the fish. These chases are lively. The sexes often change roles as to who's the chaser or the chasee. Some females seem to take advantage of the ardent males. They respond to the male's fish teasing by dancing with him and accepting the fish. But when he flies off, she does not follow. Perhaps she senses some incompatibility, or perhaps she just wants an easy meal. The males seem to have taken these bad dates as part of the scene, for it doesn't cool their ardor one bit. As soon as they catch another fish, they're back at it again with another female. The giving of fish is the behavior that binds the entire Least Tern species together. Fish are given to a prospective mate as sustenance for the brooding parent and is the major food source for the growing chicks. The catching of fish has molded their existence until their physical form, their eyesight, the way they fly, and their specialized brain has been created just for the catching of small fish close to the surface of the water. It is the culmination of the mating sequence. During breeding and nesting, the colony is a busy, noisy place, with established couples finding nesting sites and unmated terns performing aerial chases. It's like a miniature airport, with departures and landings happening simultaneously. With tern sexual identity difficult to pin down, sometimes it's hard to tell who is chasing who the parent is, and who is left behind. This chaotic activity goes on throughout the breeding colony, even after the chicks have fledged. Single males even try to entice already nesting females away from their bonded mates, and it makes attempting to decipher their behavior head-scratchingly frustrating. After mating, the serious business of nesting begins. The nest is a simple scrape in the sand, about 1 inch deep and 4 inches long. Sometimes several scrapes are dug out, but eventually one site is chosen and it becomes the nest. It's mostly the female that incubates the eggs, but exceptions are the rule, and many males take their turns patiently brooding the eggs. 2 eggs are the normal clutch, but sometimes there are 3. The eggs are cleverly camouflaged with beige or brown or black dots and splotches. Each clutch is unique in its design. These eggs are splotchy, while these eggs are mostly white and dotted with small brown spots. The design is infinitely variable. All the tern's fierce energy is now focused on the eggs. For about 21 days, they sit patiently taking turns brooding the eggs, day and night, in all weather conditions. I was lucky that I found a nesting pair close to the string fence. The frenetic rituals of mating that flowed back and forth through chase flights and purloined fish morphed into a new set of rituals involving recognition, reunion, and strengthening pair bonds. Throughout the long days and nights, the terns brood the eggs. The tern's fast metabolism means that the parent gets hungry after 2 hours, especially if the parent is a female and is still making eggs. So she relies on the male to feed her throughout the day. Unless it's an emergency, she won't leave the nest, for to expose the eggs leaves them vulnerable to predation or overheating or drying out. Early on, the terns relay their special calls to each other. Although these calls seem identical at first to all the other terns in the colony, I began to perceive small but critical nuances that identified each parent's call as distinctive. Using visual clues and these calls, each tern can find their nest site. Least terns also call as they are approaching the nest, whether there is a parent to receive them or not. The embryo inside the egg can hear the call, and thus the emerging chick knows immediately which call identifies their parent. During nesting, the female is greatly dependent on the male to be fed. Each feeding reconfirms the bond that ties the two together to protect their precious eggs. A strong pair bond ensures the future of their genetic heritage and the continuing existence of the species. When the nest is secured and the eggs are laid, the terns become vigilant defenders of their territory. Any intrusion into their ground or airspace is an invitation to aggression. Their eggs and chicks are fragile and vulnerable and demand constant attention. Hawks, egrets, gulls, owls, crows, foxes, skunks, raccoons, feral cats, and humans is just a short list of their enemies. This parent perceives a danger, makes an alarm call, and flies up to drive the intruder away, leaving the eggs to the hot sun. But not for long. The parent makes their way back to the nest as soon as possible. Now they are much less tolerant of any approach by humans. Getting too close means a dive bombing at my head with the possibility of getting splattered by their feces. They go right for my head and pull up at the last second and let go of their last digested fish. I take an umbrella with me now to avoid getting splattered. I think I've discovered another definition of their nickname of Little Striker. Terns nest in the open, so there is nowhere to hide. Their only defense is their aggressiveness towards any perceived threat. Predation is a major cause of mortality. Large gulls, like this blackback gull, are a great threat. A juvenile peregrine falcon lands in the colony and proceeds to kill least tern chicks. Even against the most powerful bird hunter on the planet, the fierce least tern launches a stern defense. Then, catastrophe. A midsummer nor'easter has struck the coast during a spring high tide, and the colony is partially overwashed. The nest by the string fence is gone. There are some tern eggs that had washed out upon the sand, exposed to the sun and wind, ruined. This nest barely escaped the overwash. I have to start all over again. The colony is in a state of flux. Some of the terns that had their nest destroyed are trying again, and the remaining nests are beginning to hatch their chicks. The colony is busier than ever. Because of the overwash, many of the new nesters have moved well inland into the vegetation, and it's difficult to get good shots. The displaced terns are crowding into the plover's territory. Conflicts have arisen. Eggs are hatching and chicks are making their appearance. Now the tern parents have more mouths to feed and more fish to catch. These parents seem baffled or proud? It's hard to tell, but definitely intensely interested in their new creation. The new chicks weigh only a few grams, so the tern chicks select small fish or eels to feed them. Unlike the plover chicks, which can fend for themselves right out of the egg, Tern chicks require care and feeding for several weeks. The chicks hatch 1 or 2 days apart, so the first hatchling doesn't stay an only chick for long. The very first fish for this newly hatched tern chick. For first-time parents, the fish feeding can be a little chancy in the beginning. But it doesn't take long until the fish feeding goes smoothly. With the hatching of the second chick, this little family is complete. The parent flies off with the shell and drops it several yards away. Apparently, chicks have the wherewithal to poop outside of the nest. For the first few days, a parent has to be brooding the chicks at all times. They are so small that they are vulnerable to chills and overheating. One parent stays on the nest, while the other brings in fish. But at some point, the brooding parent must get relieved. This involves both parents bowing their heads and pointing their bills downward and moving their heads back and forth, signifying that a switch is about to take place. Here a fish is brought in, but there is no signal for a switch, so the tern parent flies away to hunt for fish again. The ritual is reinforced by the routine of recognition and acceptance. The act of catching and feeding fish, including feeding the chicks, the presenting of fish during courtship, and the gift of fish during mating, is at the epicenter of the success of all tern species. The tern chick will stuff down the fish or eel no matter what, even if it's almost as long as the chick itself. In about 40 minutes, this fish will be almost completely digested, providing it can get the tail down. This fish isn't ready to be a meal quite yet. It fights mightily against the inevitable, even smacking the hungry chick a few times with its tail. The tough chick finally gets it down, sand and all, but it needs a few adjustments to get it finally settled. It's rare that a chick rejects a fish, but after 2 feedings within a short time, it can't take any more. Time for some happy flapping and a nap. I thought sure that at least 1 egg would be hatched by now. Wishful thinking on the part of this least tern parent. Nothing to do but eat the fish and continue brooding. Maybe next time. Sometimes the feeding is like a desperate chase, with the chick rushing towards the parent, stumpy wings flapping and mouth gaping, yelling to be fed. Sometimes it's a foot race between siblings, with the winner full of fish and the loser hungry. This juvenile chick gets a fish, but its sibling reacts by petulantly poking at the parent, and finally takes a jab at a stick in frustration. In the tern's world, fulfillment and hunger are 2 sides of the same coin. Only a few days old, still uncoordinated and awkward, these tern chicks are already emulating their parents and trying to fly. This happy flapping is the epitome of the desire to fly free. The tern nest becomes more of a concept than an actual location. It's wherever the chicks are at any moment. They tend to stay in the same general area and might even revisit the original nest. The key with 2 or more chicks is that the parent returning with a fish must know where they are. So it becomes the stay-at-home parent's job to make sure that they are kept wrangled in the same area so they can be found and fed. Some parents seem to be better at this than others. Perhaps competency comes with experience. This parent can't seem to decide on the right location. Just when the chicks think she's finally settled, off she goes again. On a windy day, the blowing sand can quickly fill up nest scrapes and obliterate surrounding sticks or vegetation that the terns use to locate their nests. On a hot, windy day, this tern parent is trying to find a location that is more protected from the wind. Blowing sand can be dangerous to small chicks weighing only a few grams. Being so small and low to the ground, they get the full brunt of the stinging sand. Wandering tern chicks can find themselves isolated and cut off from their parents. Since they get almost all of their liquid needs from fish, they must be fed often, especially on hot days. Here a parent leads her charges to a bit of shade on a blistering July day. The tern's existence balances upon a razor's edge of subsistence. Every day is a battle of their fierce will against a host of dangers. Storms, winds, spring tides, and predators are constant specters of disaster. As stressful as these dangers are, there are 3 more situations that they must deal with that are closer to home. 2 of these are inexplicable and can't be easily explained, while the last is the most deadly danger that they face. Their neighbors, the plovers, have an intense interest in the tern chicks. The plovers will come quite close to them, but I never saw them peck at them or try to hurt them in any way. The terns did not appreciate this attention, to say the least. They consistently drove the plovers away from the chicks. Perhaps it's a response to losing their own chicks in the overwash? Or some kind of territorial imperative since they nest so close together? Or just intense curiosity? It's a mystery that I can't explain. The second danger is their own kind. The tern colony represents many layers of behavior. There are mating, nesting, chick feeding, parental exchange, and the tern's constant arrival and departure, all happening simultaneously. When a tern tries to return with a fish, it has to run a gauntlet of gulls and terns that try to steal their catch. There are nesting disputes for the best sites. Some result in violent battles. In addition, there are gangs of unattached terns that try to ply the chicks with fish. They don't feed the chicks, just tease them with the fish, a behavior that is eerily similar to some of their mating behavior. Here a parent feeds a chick, and the minute the parent leaves, a stranger arrives with a fish. The chicks react with a combination of aggression and avoidance. The stranger makes no attempt to actually feed the chick, but continues to tease them with the fish. This unwanted attention can rise to harassment. When several strange terns combine to tease the chicks. Tern parents are on constant guard against the appearance of strange terns near their chicks. In this confusing melee, several strange terns congregate around a chick who aggressively rebuffs them. For the ultimate in misfortune, this chick loses its prized fish to a stranger and then gets harassed to boot. If the chicks are well fed, they will ignore the stranger's offered fish. But if they are hungry, they may try to grab the fish from the stranger's beak, but they almost never succeed. Some strange male terns try to lure a female from her nest by tempting her with a fish. As the chicks mature, the harassment increases until it takes up a large portion of the parents' and chicks' energy in dealing with the strangers. The parents respond by moving the chicks back from the open areas to the vegetation where they are more hidden from view. It's only a matter of time, however, before they are found and the harassment continues. The tern's world is centered around the giving and receiving of fish in several important ways. But treachery and thievery are commonplace in the tern's world, and a successful tern must expect to be both a thief and a victim many times in its life. It's been 21 days since these chicks hatched in July. The baby down is gone, and their juvenile feathers have appeared. Their beaks have grown long and sharp, and even their dark eye line is beginning to develop. It will be another year before their adult plumage appears. Now they spend much of the day preening their new flight feathers in anticipation of their first important passage into adulthood: flight. Their early happy flapping as chicks has evolved into practice flights that carry them a foot or two above the ground. It won't be long now. But even if they are almost as large as their parents, they are still entirely dependent upon them to be fed. They quickly gobble down the fish before another tern, perhaps even their brother or sister, steals it from them. Because they are still earthbound, they can't get away from the persistent stranger's harassment. Sometimes the tables are turned, and the famished juveniles chase the stranger for the fish. The chicks try to find a clearing in the vegetation, or hang around by a landmark where they can be seen by their parents. And then, suddenly, they can fly. When their flight muscles are able to take them on more extended flights, they join a creche, a loose gathering of fledged chicks and parents that hang around the water's edge. The tern parents are never very far away. They practice a stern form of tough love. The parents don't instruct the juveniles in the specific arts of being a tern. The juveniles learn by observation and practice. Although the young terns are still fed by the parents, the feeding is slowly withdrawn over the next few weeks, and hunger spurs the juveniles into mastering the difficult skill of diving into the water after fish. In the rough and windy waters of Ipswich Sound, the adults make the difficult skill of catching fish look easy. while the juveniles practice in the shallow, quieter waters of a nearby inlet. Lacking the economy of flight of their parents, the juvenile fishermen will practice by bouncing up and down on the wind, trying to fix the position of the fish for a final strike. By their third or fourth month, they are mostly self-sufficient. They hang around another couple of weeks, honing their new fishing skills. But by the end of August, they are gone. The small nesting area at Sandy Point is stripped of much of its life. The constant calling, the lilting flights, the theft and treachery, the fierce will and force of their lives are gone. They migrate down to Cuba or Mexico or Colombia at a leisurely pace. They may or may not be back next June. This could be the logical end to my little film, but it is not. There is a dark and tragic backstory. I walk the now abandoned tern colony. I find old nesting scrapes that have devolved into smudges in the sand and bits of turned down. And the ghoulish archaeology. A least tern killed by an owl, and a headless carcass that emerges from the blowing sand. These are the inevitable risks of a tern's life, but there are other, even greater dangers than these. It started in France, where feather-adorned hats became a fashion statement among royalty. The fad soon spread to the rest of Europe and eventually to England, where the Industrial Revolution created a wealthy upper class that could afford these expensive hats. Women's hats became ever larger and more laden with feathers. The fad spread to America, where it grew exponentially with the nouveau riche. Raw feather prices increased until in 1910 an ounce of feathers was worth 3 times that of gold. The large millinery manufacturers of London, New York, and Paris hired thousands of hunters to kill millions of birds for their feathers alone. A fisherman barely eking out a living in Florida or Maryland or Louisiana can earn 15 cents a bird killing for the hat trade. The millinery companies and the hunters got rich. The hats grew larger and more lavishly decorated with feathers, even with whole stuffed birds. Feather hunters wiped out whole breeding colonies by killing the parents, plucking their feathers, and leaving the chicks to starve, murdering 2 generations of birds at once. Large breeding colonies of egrets, cranes, herons, and, of course, terns that had been ongoing for thousands of years were wiped out in a couple of seasons of hunting. By the turn of the 20th century, many of these birds were in danger of going extinct. While it was women who drove the feather market, it was also women who fought against it. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, or RSPB Society, was founded by influential women in England who demonstrated against the feather trade. Two influential Boston socialites, Harriet Hemingway and Mina Hall, disgusted at the slaughter of birds, created the Audubon Society and lobbied for the passage of the Migratory Bird Act in 1913. Famous authors like W.H. Hudson and Virginia Woolf wrote scathing tracts denouncing women's fashion, the milliners, and hunters alike. Newspaper articles and cartoonists pilloried the people behind the massacre. By the end of World War I, societal values were changing. Gone were the corsets, the frilly dresses, and the feathered hats, to be replaced by flapper dresses and the simpler cloche hat. By the 1920s, the feather trade had collapsed. The mass killing finally stopped. It would be nice to report that the birds recovered and that the tern population was back to where it was before the Great Feather Massacre began. But that would not be true. Of the 100,000 least terns that nested along the Atlantic beaches before the feather trade, only about 20% of that number survive today, and their population is slowly declining. Human beach development, overcrowding, feral cats, and the result of global warming, including increasingly severe storms and rising sea levels, all contribute to the desecration and destruction of their breeding areas. Because the least tern must nest on the open beach just above the high tide, they are especially vulnerable to all of these dangers. It is unknown whether these birds can adjust to these new conditions before their population declines beyond what can be saved. As for now, they are barely holding their own. You might say they're between a rock and a hard place. Least terns are no longer just another white bird that wheels through the sky that I see along the beach. The least tern and I are irrevocably entangled. I sat with them long enough to see how their fierce lives are lived, how that every day is a battle for every fish, every mate, every scrap of sand, and every chick that they fiercely protect from danger. Even their theft and treachery is an expression of their desire to survive. The least tern has burned memories inside my mind, which will forever be a part of me.